I won't lie. The radio silence on the Silent Hill 2 remake is starting to get to me. I've resorted to watching fan reactions on YouTube to continue to stimulate my hype balls. In the several months since the official announcement of the Silent Hill 2 remake, the discourse seems to have fallen upon one of two sides. Pure, unsustained optimism.
Bro, my glass is fogging up, bro. I'm sweating.
Silent
Oh my
Hill.
god.
Or a complete dismissal of the entire project because Bloober team is making it.
A little bit. Oh, ooh, Bloober. Uh-oh.
I lean towards the optimism route, even though my experiences with Bloober team and their games aren't vast or necessarily the most positive. And why I believe that is important is because Silent Hill 2 as a game and a story just means way too much to me to be utterly consumed by negativity. In fact, I just can't let myself feel that way. Because if I give into that potential negative outcome of this remake, I think my enjoyment of storytelling through video games, in general, might take psychic damage. That being said, I do legitimately completely understand where the concern is coming from. I think on top of everything, remaking Silent Hill 2 would not only be a difficult thing to do for Takeyoshi Sato, the man, the myth, and the legend behind the original game, let alone a completely different studio. The pressure on the team making the game must be astronomical. Not only because of the fans' response to the finished product, but because the people over at Bloober Team are so genuinely in love with the franchise, and I doubt that they would ever be able to live with themselves if they didn't make the best game that they thought they could. I honestly feel for the team and legitimately hope that they succeed in whatever it is that they're doing. This can make or break the studio forever. Silent Hill 2, as I have said many times on this channel, is the most meaningful piece of art in my meaningless life. But that doesn't mean that I think it's perfect. While I believe that a vast majority of the game is as close to perfection as possible, I would like to believe that just with any art form, there is room for improvement.
What if you can't find Mary? What will you do?
So in order to balance out this desert period of news regarding the Silent Hill 2 remake, as well as stimulate some positive positrons into the discourse regarding this game's release, I wanted to make a quick video talking about things that Bloober could legitimately improve on from the original title. And just to make things a little streamlined, I will tackle these topics in order of what I believe to be the least important thing to what I believe is the most important tweaks and changes that Bloober can do in order to make the Silent Hill 2 remake not only potentially live up to the height that its mere existence brings upon itself, but more than that, find ways to improve on what many people consider to be perfection. A very common nitpick I hear about Silent Hill 2, especially when compared to the other three original games, is that Silent Hill 2, for some reason, is really lacking in enemy variety. The first game had, with the exception of a couple variations and the boss on occasion, there are roughly about 10 to 12 enemy types. The third game had about 9, and the fourth had about 11. Silent Hill 2, on the other hand, has really only about 6, and that's including Pyramid Head. I think the original game loses its sense of horror from a mechanical perspective when it comes to encountering enemies, because by the time that you reach the halfway point of the game, you've already encountered all but one enemy type, which really limits how much the game can actually bring up a sense of fear when dealing with them, because you've already essentially mastered how to deal with all of them. I think while it may normally be seen as daring or even a stupid choice for a team remaking a game with the pedigree of Silent Hill 2 to add to the roster of enemy types and variety, I think that Bloober has a silver lining here, and that is that Masahiro Ito is back at the helm of creature design. Bloober creating a new enemy, or maybe even two, isn't really that far out of the realm of possibility. It would also, as is a theme in this video, give veterans of the original something new to throw them off guard and make the experience a lot more engaging for us old heads. Get fucked.
Is it dead? What the hell is it?
I doubt anybody, even people that really like Silent Hill 2, would say the combat is good. You'll find plenty of people that argue that the combat isn't the point, and I would also be one of those people. I would never make the argument that Silent Hill 2's combat is bad, it's just serviceable. Now, it's obvious to anybody who is interested in the remake to know that Bloober team is in fact updating the combat. But what's interesting is Masahiro Ito is back not only working the creature designs, but also the spearhead of combat design for this remake. I think that there is a hope that we can find a wonderful balance between what I'll call bad, normal survival horror combat and what I'll call good, contemporary survival horror combat. But I think that with the original Team Silent members, there is at least a baseline optimism regarding a potential fix to the original game's combat to still be something that fits in tone with the game, the story, and the genre itself. Now, unlike many of the things that are on this list, we do actually have some frame of reference when talking about the remake. They showed a very brief instance of the game's combat functioning, and it looks like it seems to be utilizing the same design space that Silent Hill Homecoming utilized. Now, that may sound like a bad thing, but that's just because if they copied Homecoming's mechanics and ported them into this remake, yes, that would be really bad. But I think that Homecoming's issue with combat was more or less an issue of not understanding how to make its own design work. Homecoming suffers from a little thing that I'll call I didn't laugh this hard when I wrote this line. Existing in the pre-Dark Souls era. I'm joking, but I'm also kind of being serious. Homecoming's combat works on a one-to-one style where you lock on an enemy and dodge and attack them. The issue with it is that it works in a realistic way where unless you completely, and I mean completely, dodge an attack, you will get hit by it. The reason that I give it the name pre-Dark Souls era is because that I think if the game was made before a time that iframes were really utilized in an offensive and defensive way. If Bloober can incorporate the same essential idea that was Homecoming's combat and give it the added benefit of utilizing iframes in the game's dodging, but simply just make the combat critically timing based, then I do think it will work in the game's favor. And it will still feel like it fits inside the survival horror template. Now, as far as stamina is concerned, of all of the mechanics in Silent Hill 2, this is the one that just seems it was completely tossed to the side and forgotten about while still being implemented in the most bare bones of ways. All of the Silent Hill games, well, at least the original 3, Silent Hill 4 had a much greater emphasis on stamina as a general mechanic, but in the original 3 games, you have a really neat mechanic where if you overexert yourself via running, you will lose stamina and begin to run slower. Now, the issue that I have with this is that the game wants you to juggle its running with your standard walk cycles while running in the streets of Silent Hill. But because of how big the city is and how long you'd be traversing in between places, especially on your first go around, what ends up happening is the mechanic is never really fully utilized. Sure, your character will run slower after a certain point, but there's no de-escalation from that point forward. You go from a fast sprint into a decently paced jog. I think that upping the punishment of always running throughout the town could and should be more heavily utilized. It will also give a reason to potentially have to stop and deal with enemy encounters throughout the town instead of what actually happens when playing the game, which is just running by everything. So, I don't really know if this is a hot take or anything, but the way that Eddie is handled in Silent Hill 2 is, in my opinion, one of the biggest missteps of the game. And I do want to clarify, however, that it's not that I think his purpose or thematic relevance to the story needs to be improved, because that's as good as you can get. What I mean specifically is when you compare Eddie to Angela, who you meet only 4 times in both cases, Angela's story and arc is not only much better told, but I think much more impactful due to not only the nature of her story, but just the very reasonable and smooth transition between each and every encounter. And her story doesn't end bombastically, it ends tragically. Eddie's story, however, has always irked me in the sense that you meet him 2 times when he's normal. The first time you meet him in the apartment complex, and he's very obviously hiding something. The second time that you see him is the infamous pizza scene, and then the very next time that you see him, he's going through a psychotic episode, having already killed someone essentially right in front of you. The thing that always irked me about this is that the second time that you meet Angela, when compared to the third time you meet Angela where you fight the abstract daddy, those two seem congruent with each other. Eddie's doesn't. Need I remind you that you go all the way through both versions of Brookhaven Hospital and then made it practically halfway through the Historical Society before all of a sudden going from a pizza-eating schlub to a psychotic and completely mentally deranged killer in a span of 1 encounter. I'm not saying that it's not foreshadowed or anything, but it always felt weird to make that jump. You could argue that the time frame in between the 2 encounters makes this jump more believable, and sure, that may be a valid way to look at it, but what it doesn't change is the sudden shift of his character from essentially the ground up. I think, for instance, instead of making the first encounter in the Historical Society one that where he's clearly unhinged, but one where maybe he's breaking, and then the next time you see him is the one where you kill him, would be a much better transition and a much better way to tell his story. This is a much more nuanced wish list item because, 1, I don't think that the riddle difficulty selection is bad. In fact, if they don't keep it, I will be genuinely upset. And 2, it's not like I think the puzzles in Silent Hill 2 are bad. In fact, I would say a chunk of them are pretty good. To those who don't know, Silent Hill 2 has 2 different difficulty selections: Action and Riddle. Action difficulty is pretty self-explanatory, as it's generally what most games use when considering a difficulty selection. It affects you and your enemy's health, ammo pickups, damage dealt, etc. Riddle difficulty is a little bit more vague. What it implies is the difficulty of puzzles, and while yes, that is technically true, there are really only a few that get affected by this, at least in their entirety. The clearest example I can make is by contrasting 2 different puzzles and how those puzzles are affected by the difficulty selection. In the apartment complex, there is a puzzle where you find coins that you have to place in a desk in order to get a key. The sequence of the coins depends on a single poem that you find on the drawer itself. I won't even bother explaining the easy puzzle, but here's the normal riddle. 3 bright coins in 5 holes, be. At one end sits the seducer of she. The wind from behind the woman doth play, the formless one no lies furthest from they. The old one beside the serpent sits not, 'tis to the prisoner's left that he doth rot. And here it is on hard. First lies the seat of he who is peerless, silent and empty, heartless and fearless. Beside him sits the one who knows the place of the servant is next to the throne. Dozens of feet, yet not a single toe. The one that is hidden beside him doth go. Seducer of dreams, creature of Hades, lying further from man and closer to lady. Man and women seeing all, heedless to the raven's call. Silent and hidden the 2 may be, they be not there for you to see. Return them to whence they would be, and blessing shall descend upon thee. I speak thus with the North Star behind me. The birth of the sun is the start of the story. Both of these riddles lead to different solutions to the sequence of coins. Now, in the hospital, there is a puzzle box that you have to unlock in order to get a strand of hair that you can use to help you get another key. While this puzzle box has several locks that you need to break in order to get into the box itself, the issue here is that the puzzle isn't really affected by the riddle difficulty at all. No matter what the difficulty is, this is what you have to do. You have to get the lapis eye key, you have to get the code from the carbon paper, you have to find the turn the numbers code, and then you have to use the purple wool key. And sure, the numbers for the codes may change on repeat playthroughs, but you don't have to do anything different. And what is different doesn't require any extra brain power. The issue that I have with the original is that most puzzles in the game don't utilize this scalable riddle difficulty. And if you ask me, Bloober can easily improve this genius mechanic into a more fleshed out one simply by making more puzzles be affected by what riddle difficulty that is selected. It would make the game much more interesting and actually give a better incentive for people to play on every riddle difficulty. If I could have only one wish granted on this remake, it would be this one. It's easily my most wanted improvement over the original game. And for the original game, this isn't really an issue, so to say, but even when this game was new to me when I was 13 years old, I was always enraptured by the idea of exploring more and more of these old buildings, becoming engulfed in the dark rooms and imagine the empty hollow hallways and the monsters that would be inside of them. Much like the Resident Evil 4 remake that recently came out that expanded on a lot of the simple ideas in the original game, such as adding many multiple side quests that the merchant gives you, the Silent Hill 2 remake can expand on the idea that the original birthed with places like Neely's Bar and the lone trailer that you can find right off of Saul Street. The idea of Bloober putting in optional mini-dungeons that lead to an almost inevitable stat upgrade, similar to even simple upgrades that Resident Evil 7 brought to the table, such as basic health and stamina upgrades. Nothing fancy, nothing that would take away from the mainline story, or even the survival horror nature of the game's mechanics, but just something to make the town feel more fleshed out, automatically gives someone who is already familiar enough with the game on a mechanical basis to give the game a playthrough. There's a game that I made a video on a little while ago called Remorse the List, which was an open world horror game whose biggest issue was that it never really felt like it committed to its open world design. Sure, its world was technically open, but when you think of an open world game, you think of places to explore for fun, or that are at the very least optional and not delegated to a story segment. I think of essentially any shrine in Breath of the Wild, or any cave that you can find in Elden Ring, or Black Reach in Skyrim. But in Remorse the List, anything that was optional or extra was 9 times out of 10 just like a one-room deal. It genuinely felt underwhelming from the prospect of the idea that you get in your head when you hear open world horror game. I don't expect Bloober to make Silent Hill 2 an open world horror game, but if they can utilize the city of Silent Hill and give us a few expanded on or optional areas that feel worthy of exploring and leave a lot of optional areas as complex as even just a few rooms that have like a puzzle or some combat encounter in them, I think that even if Bloober misses the mark on most of the rest of the game, then this feature actually being featured in the remake makes the game worthy of existing. And those are my biggest wishes for the Silent Hill 2 remake. There are probably a few more things that I could cover, but they'd be stupidly pointless, like map controls, and me literally hoping they keep the film grain from the original game. I think that Bloober has a lot to prove here. 2023 has already given us quite a few remakes, and by the time that the Silent Hill 2 remake comes out, there will have been even more. Dead Space, Resident Evil 4, and System Shock are all the big ones that I can think of, and all of them, bar from the System Shock remake because it hasn't been released at the time of making this video, have been legitimately excellent. Bloober's track record hasn't been the greatest, but I do have faith in them to accomplish this two-faced dream job. It's truly a gift as much as it is a curse to have to bear this remake to the Silent Hill fandom. Let's just hope Bloober can stay Bloober and not become gaming's Blooper.
The hair and the needle? That's fucking awful.
Tomato is a fruit, but it also a vegetable.